The last time you were on the podcast, we discovered how your exciting journey in aviation came to be. You gave us the details of how a kid from the Bronx ended up accomplishing a successful aviation career in both the U.S. Navy and as a captain at a Legacy airline. If you had to focus on the personality trait that most influenced your success, what would that be?
I have to think about that one. The personality trait that most influenced my success. I would say leadership. Leadership, being a good leader, compartmentalizing. I'd say leadership. You have to be an effective leader. You have to lead by example. You have to be, and this is always applied to me as a young African American in society today. I feel like I have to outperform my peers. I always, it's just an innate responsibility or feeling that I have to prove that I'm good enough. And so when I'm in the cockpit, I'm constantly trying to be better and make conscious decisions to follow the FOM to my knowledge as close as possible, and just be the best professional I can be, and emote and lead with that capability.
Yeah, and what really impressed me as we got down this road of leadership in our conversation is that you told me that you were the featured speaker at Legacy Airlines' very first cadet class of their cadet program. Now, we've had the cadet program recruiters on the podcast before. We've had a mentor, Kyle Jensen, on the podcast before, and we've also had a few cadets. You were the featured speaker for the very first class back in 2018. You were showing me photos of you on the podium. It was really cool to see. How did that get started? What allowed you to get into that role?
So I've been a mentor to young aviators for probably the past 25, 30 years in my career. Basically, since I started flying, I always try to reach back into the community, make sure, people can see me and I can help them reach their goals as a aviator, or not necessarily in the aviation profession, but just professionally. And as a mentor, what I realized in the aviation community was, in order to be a really effective leader and mentor, I needed to put myself in a position to actually help these pilots reach that ultimate goal, that dream job. So I basically applied to become a new hire interviewer at Legacy. And as a new hire interviewer, I, again, always putting my best foot forward, was selected to actually train new hire interviewers. So when Legacy Airline hired new interviewers, I was actually doing some of the training so that they could become effective interviewers. Mm-hmm. Through that process, the person in charge at the time was Dave Tatum. He basically had the confidence and respect for me to be able to lend my professionalism and mentor skills to the cadet program. And he chose me to come to Dallas and basically give a motivational speech to that first class. And I was beyond honored and full of pride to be able to do that. And I told them the story about my dad. I think we talked about this on the last episode, how I wasn't able to reach my goal of becoming a naval aviator right out of college. And my dad gave me those wings and told me to keep my eye on the prize. So that's the story I gave them and conveyed to them, that the only thing between them and achieving their goal was basically them, it being getting out of their own way to make that happen.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that, because I was going to ask you, what is the best advice that you can give someone who is maybe thinking about becoming an aviator, but hesitates because of the instability that they see in the news with furloughs and things like that? Do you tell them, if this is really what you want to do, go for it? Or do you give something a little bit more detailed about it?
Well, I tell them to make sure this is what they want. Go do a discovery flight, do a couple of them. Make sure you're absolutely sure that this is where your passion is, because you have to have passion, you have to have drive and determination, and then you can't ever take no for an answer. If you decide that that's where you're going to go, then you have to put the blinders on and plow forward with everything you have, because there's so many things that can get in your way when you pursue the aviation goal. It requires focus, determination, drive, and a ton of effort. So those are all the things that you have to put into it. And so you need to make sure that that's absolutely what you want to do.
So why is mentoring so important then to you?
For me, when my dad would bring me to work when he was a mechanic, and they'd finish working on the airplane and taxi the airplane from the hangar to the terminal, when I was sitting in that cockpit pretending to push the buttons, I always thought I was going to be a mechanic. I never really thought that I was going to be a pilot, because I never saw any pilots that looked like me. So I think it's important that to be a mentor, so people can see people like them can become pilots in a major airline.
Yeah. And you're mentioning our previous conversation. If you haven't listened to episode 50 of Squawk Ident, I highly encourage you after this show to go back and take a listen, because Kevin's journey is absolutely amazing. He stands on the shoulders of many of the aviators that came before him, and he was able to overcome quite a bit of adversity to get here, to be so successful in the U.S. Navy, to have so many different opportunities, and then to parlay that into a career in commercial aviation and get on with an airline at a young age. And you mentioned earlier, like, oh, I have more captain time than you, but man, you've got hours. You have some hours. We mentioned, we were trying to calculate this earlier today. It's like something more like 20,000 plus,
right.
20,000 plus hours.
I came out of the Navy with close to 4,000. So I started in 98. So what's that? 23 years of, so yeah, roughly 20,000.
Yeah. I mean, just amazing of all that you've accomplished. And we're constantly talking about this professionalism, this leadership. It must be pretty important. How can a new student pilot who's maybe fresh out of high school, working on their rating at 18, 19 years old, they're focusing on learning the languages of aviation, weather phenomenon and terms. They're learning, the charts and regulations and airspace volumes and how to tune and identify VOR and track a localizer inbound and all this information. And amongst all that, they've got to worry about professionalism. How do they do that?
That's where the mentor comes in. Having a mentor, you don't even really have to do it intentionally. You're just there for them. And I think they see how you respond, how you react, what you talk about. And while they're focusing on the things that they need to focus on as a student, they're soaking all this in peripherally, if that's a word. They're soaking this in it's through osmosis. It's becoming part of their psyche. It's becoming part of who they are, their personality.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my very first guests on the show was a very talented young man who is now here at Legacy Airlines, Jean-Michael. Jean-Michael and I were at the training hotel in Dallas at the same time. What happened was I was checking into the hotel, had just come off the flight that I commuted in from LA. And I hear Anthony, and I turn around, and no one's called me Anthony for a while. So I turn around, and oh my God, Jean-Michael. He was the 17-year-old student pilot, youngest sign-off I ever had, my first student pilot sign-off I ever had. And he was standing behind me, and I'm like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Oh, I just got hired." And I'm thinking, at the regional? And he's like, no, I'm a 7.3 FO for Legacy.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, what's your seniority going to be when you retire? Because they all know, And
Right.
he's like, oh, it's going to be like in the under 100, I think he said. And so he told me about his journey, and we got to record one of our first shows together.
Awesome.
Doing that. But I thought about that, and I think about that often. There were times when I thought, he's so young.
Right.
You're at the command of an aircraft, and though it's relatively safe if you know what you're doing and you're following the procedures and the guidelines and the lessons you've learned, and you've had instructors sign you off that they're confident and they're putting their endorsement behind you that you're going to make good decisions, safe decisions on the flight deck. I know what I was like when I was 17.
Right.
And I know that I probably, if I didn't have someone in the back of my mind that I knew I would disappoint if I did something stupid,
Right.
that I probably would have done something stupid.
Right.
And my hat's off to the younger generation, because the opportunity to go, oh, hold my beer, watch this.
Right.
In this industry is plentiful, because when you're on the flight deck, unless you're in training or in a simulator doing recurrent training of some kind, or on the flight line with your flight instructor,
Right.
you really don't have anyone looking over your shoulder,
Right.
especially solo.
Right.
So you're like, hey, I'm going to go buzz that cow. Well, if you have a mentor in your life,
Mm-hmm.
and you think in the back of your mind, you have that little voice going, Kevin would be disappointed in me.
Sure.
I shouldn't do that.
Right.
I think that's what makes mentorship, not just answering the questions, because you can go online. Technology's there. We've talked about that.
Right.
I think it's that I want to make them proud. I want to be.
And
better.
That's why I believe in the mentorship program so much, because I mean, I look back to my career, and fortunate for me, I was in the military. And, when you're 25, 28 years old and you're strapping $1 million jet on your back, you don't have passengers to worry about. You don't have anybody really that you're responsible to other than your crew. You can go out and do whatever you want in that airplane. You don't have as many people looking at you from the outside. If you have that mentor or somebody that you look up to and you say, wow, if I went out and did that, I would disappoint them. I didn't really have too much of that earlier in my career when I was young. So my path as a military aviator was probably the better path at that point, because I don't know if I had the maturity back then to be a captain at even a regional.
Having that discipline at a young age
Absolutely.
really helped.
I was kind of a wild child back then. I mean, I had a few mentors, but they were also military guys. And so I didn't have that discipline.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's really one of the most key features in what a mentor can offer a young person. So you were telling me last night that you think everyone who has the ability should mentor. Why do you feel that way?
I mean, if you think about it, it's the only way you can influence the future. You can go back and you can grab however many people you can grab and show them, not just in aviation, but in life, what it takes to be successful. What they need, what skill set they need to be what they want to be. I have a young lady that's working in a hospital, and I think she's in Utah, and she sent me a private message about getting into the military physician's assistant program. And I said, oh my gosh, you'd be a great candidate. You were a water polo player in high school. You played water polo in college. You've been working in the health industry for many years now. Be a perfect candidate. So I wrote her a letter of recommendation to submit to the Air Force. Mm-hmm. All she needed to do was get accepted into a PA program, which she since has done that. So she's going to go get her PA degree on the Air Force dime and become a second lieutenant, or actually I think she goes in as a captain in the Air Force.
Nice.
And I get a chance to pin her captain's bars on and make her a commissioned officer in the Air Force. And so that feeling, that ability to help people matriculate and become productive citizens, I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? I mean, I think everybody should do it. It's an incredible sense of pride, and it makes you, it's a great sense of accomplishment when you can go in and do that and influence the younger generation.
Yeah. And I too feel very similarly about mentoring. I can't stress enough the level of pride when I get a message from someone saying that they've made their next accomplishment, they've set their next goal, and they're moving forward. It's a wonderful place to be, and I absolutely agree that mentoring, I think, is crucial. We should be focused on that more than we are. I think especially now, this is the time, and this show really has been my way to get the word out, to say, look, if you really want to do this because of the thrill of the polyester and the uniform, don't do it.
Right.
And that's how I try to weed out those that are coming into it for the wrong reason. But if you have a passion and you're not going to let no the first couple times dissuade you from this career, then I'm like, okay, let's talk.
Well, even, look at when I talk to particularly young kids in like say elementary school, one of the first things they ask, because they always ask the question, how much money do you make? You should never, I don't think that you should get into this profession for the money. I mean, as you know, it's been kind of a up and down, a cyclic journey as far as pay and the aviation career.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't broadcast this publicly except for on your podcast. But really, when you look at this job, I kind of compare it to a professional athlete. We are doing something that we love to do. At least you should be in love with what you do. You really wouldn't have to pay me a lot to do it. I love the job that much. And so it's like an athlete, you love playing that sport and you do it for the love of the game. And that's what I think people should remember when they come into aviation, is do it because you love it, not because you want to get rich doing it, because you're probably not going to get rich doing it.
Well, not only the money, but this profession has its fair share of challenges and sacrifices that every aviator has to contend with if this career path is for them. And the airline career path is not the only path. It's the path that I speak of most, until my other co-host, Roger, puts me in my place like he did on the last show. You airline guys, you don't know anything. Right. But it has its fair share of challenges and sacrifices.
Right.
Without getting into too much detail, how can one really expect to overcome all those and not have everything else in their life just fall apart?
I think we touched on this last night, compartmentalization. It's a character trait that you have to have in the military for sure, and definitely in the aviation profession. So you have to be able to be laser focused and do all these different things that are required to get to the point that, where you get your ATP but then you have to put that in a box and be able to live your life and accomplish all the other things that come your way. And I don't know, it's a difficult balance, but it's certainly doable.
Yeah. I think the most successful aviators in terms of balancing family life and home and hobbies and their athletic aspirations, whenever I find an aviator that's truly in a good place, it's because they're not so laser focused on their career that they lose sight of everything else around them. And I got to admit, I've been guilty of that in the past,
right,
where I'm focused on my career progression, and I didn't give due time to the other aspects of my life, like family and finances. Right. And, I had to learn that. And I learned that through the advice and the mentoring of the pilots I flew with, a lot of the captains I flew with, both early on and now here in my later part of my career. And I think the healthiest individuals say, well, I've had a heavy month this month in terms of my schedule. So I have 3 days off, and don't call me. I'll be with my family. I'm taking my family camping, or my wife needs time away from the kids. So I'm going to, have her pay for her to go on this little retreat with her girlfriends. Right. And I'm going to stay home with the kids. Right. Or, every Thursday night I have to be home because Thursday night's the night I make dinner. Right. So there's a balance. And I think that is the crucial part of surviving this career. Right. A lot of times we forget because we're having so much fun doing what we do. Right. And then we're thinking about it. And I've had some time off. I was looking forward to coming back to work.
Right. It's, again, the compartmentalization where you can park the jet at the terminal in Los Angeles, get in your car, and however long your drive home is, you decompress. And then when you get home, you have to basically shelve that trip unless your family wants to know about it. But then it's time to focus on your other life, which is all the non-pilot issues and things that go on there. And having a hobby helps, me being a triathlete, all my training, my girlfriend, taking care of her needs and making sure she's happy. That's where my focus is when I get off work.
Yeah. And I can't tell you how important that is. And thank you for sharing that with us. We'll be right back with more from Captain Elmore in just a moment.